Welcome, everybody, to Spirituality Adventures. This is a non-judgmental place to explore spirituality, and we're so glad you're here. This is a viewer and listener-supported podcast, so we greatly appreciate your support. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Be sure and like, share, and subscribe to any of the social media content platforms that you're using. And then if you go to our website, spiritualityadventures.com, you can make a one-time donation, or with a monthly subscription, you'll gain access to our bonus content. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you for tuning in. All right, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. We're glad you joined us. We have Bob Hill with us today, Pastor Emeritus of Community Christian Church down on the Plaza. Mm-hmm. Pastored there for what, 30 years? 30 years. But pastored many years even before that, right?
A little bit. Pastored for about 5 years before that, a little storefront church in Nashville, Tennessee, as I was a tent maker, I guess you could say, because I did the church job was a side job. I actually worked for a group called Project Return that was a fledgling social service agency that helped people leaving prisons and jails. And by the way, it still exists. Unbelievable. So right. I helped launch it, and then it got subsumed by the state of Tennessee.
So I pastored Vineyard Church. I started it in 1990 and resigned in 2019.
Wow. Okay.
So
I was here, very parallel. I came here in 85.
Okay.
And then until 2015.
Okay.
And then since 2015, I've been a community consultant, mostly with the Kauffman Foundation on education.
Yeah. And then we met really, maybe 2.5 years ago, something like that. Through a common friend. And then we've been in a helping shepherds group all the way through COVID and all this stuff. Till today, right? Yeah. So I've been, my one of my regrets is that I didn't connect with you so much earlier in my work and ministry.
Mine, in response to you as well. I did not know of you. I did know of the Vineyard movement and the Vineyard churches, mostly through Todd Hunter. He didn't know me from Adam, but we met a long time ago in a peer support group thing that was supported by the Lilly Endowment that was created in disciples circles. And we had a time with him in California.
Okay, cool.
When he was doing all that stuff, and before he became a bishop and all the rest, and got connected with the Anglican Church. So, I regret that we didn't know each other and didn't do some things together, but we're doing it now.
Yeah. Well, Todd Hunter, for those of you who are listening, maybe that know the Vineyard background, John Wimber died in 97, and Todd became the national director for the Vineyard movement after John's death. He did that just for a couple of years, and then resigned, and then went to be the national director of Alpha in the USA.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Served there for several years. Because Wimber was a pretty big influence on Nicky Gummel, who wrote the Alpha program. And then Todd, took his journey into the Anglican world and became bishop in America now of one branch of the Anglican. I think it's the Rwandan branch of the Anglican Church, isn't it?
I'm not sure which one it is. There's lots of permutations there, but a very interesting journey actually out of the Calvary Chapel, or at least with Chuck Smith, connected even with that branch of Christianity in America.
And he's back in Costa Mesa now.
Todd is?
Yeah. There's an Anglican church there, but he's a bishop. Like, he oversees a church here in Kansas City, Christ Church here in Kansas City. Anyway, Todd and I served Wimber asked us to be on a national evangelism task force for the Vineyard movement back in 94 or 5. So I've been
small world.
Long time friends with Todd. But at any rate, well, let's start with your story. Like, where did you grow up? How did you receive a calling to pastoring? And what was your denominational background?
Sure.
For people who don't know you, right?
Yeah. I was born in Hawaii, Honolulu, at Tripler Hospital. I'm a Navy kid because my dad was in the Navy. Had re-upped for the Korean War during that time. But we lived there. I have memories of Hawaii. I really do. I have memories of the beach and palm trees. But then we moved to Brownsville to Texas, Hyco, Stephenville. Eventually, we settled in Brownsville, Texas, which is down on the border. So we were the only Anglo family in the neighborhood.
I'm trying to think. Brownsville is near San Antonio.
Oh, no, way south. It's the tip bottom of Texas, and there would be
down by
Matamoros.
El Paso, or
no, El Paso's way up northwest. It's at if you look at the tip bottom, that's Brownsville.
Okay, I've never been there.
And so a lot of people know about McAllen because it is a famous place for a lot of snowbirds, and the snowbirds go to Harlingen, fly into Harlingen, but Brownsville, it's about 98% Latino. And anyway, I had a great childhood there. Learned baseball, got baptized, went to church, and my mother later would tell me something as our family was moving. My parents divorced, and we were moving up to the Houston area so my mother could have access to MD Anderson Hospital. She had been given a very stark diagnosis. And she said, son, if you have a good congregation, a good doctor, and a good school, you can have a good life. And she was passing on some wisdom so that I wouldn't be left with nothing to live by. So anyway, but I got my grandmother and mother were great influences on me. Both with regard to literature and poetry and words, and also church. And you just go to church. You go to church.
Which church was it?
It was Central Christian Church, and it was a disciple related before the disciples were really disciple. It was really called the just Christian Church movement.
Okay.
And we became a denomination, ironically, in 1968, right when denominations were about to start a steady decline, mainline denominations, right, and go the way of all flesh and just not begin to crumble, but we didn't really need to be a denomination, but we became one, and it gave us certain access to powerful connections in doing ecumenical work, especially mission work for disaster relief and the rest all around the world, and that's great. So the Christian Church Disciples of Christ is the name. It's an unwieldy name for the denomination. And I flirted in college with becoming Episcopalian because there was a really great campus minister at TCU, which is where I went.
Okay.
And I got drafted.
I lived in Fort Worth because I went to
where'd you live?
Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary.
Of course you did. Of course.
Yeah.
You'd be a good Baptist guy.
Yeah. So I graduated from Baylor in 83. So I was in Waco for 4 years, and then I moved to Fort Worth. And I was there for 4 years, just not too far from TCU campus. Honestly.
There we go.
And,
well, I lived right around from the intersection University and Berry, and that may not be the right time, but I'm almost on campus.
Right.
I lived in the dorm for 1 year, and then I got drafted. I was the last batch that their numbers were called and had to perform some kind of service. I was a conscientious objector, and which meant I was a pacifist at that time. And I said, I don't mind serving my country. And they said, we don't mind you doing that either, but you're going to have to be as far away from your draft board as possible. That's Houston. So LA, that qualified. And we don't want you to make much money. And I made $50 a month, so that qualified. So I went to South Central LA and worked in a community center and a church.
So you didn't finish at TCU?
I did.
Okay.
5 years later.
Okay.
So I went and did 2 years of service in South Central, and it was there that a confirmation of the call came about. Because at this church, which had been formed as an interracial congregation in 1942.
Oh, wow.
The center in 42 and the community center in 46. it shaped my life. There were Asians and African Americans and Vietnamese and Latinos and white folks all in the same church. And I thought that I'd come home. I'd really come home. And that was a confirmation of a call. I don't know about you, but calls come in different ways. Get Bob up there for Youth Sunday. He can talk. He knows how to talk. Is that a call? I don't think so. I think the call comes earlier for me. It came when I was a child, probably 7, maybe even earlier than that. I can remember putting together something I learned at school, maybe in kindergarten, and something I was learning at church about God. But it was about the solar system. You mentioned that earlier. And the photographs that are coming back from the new telescope that we've sent out to farthest reaches of the cosmos. And I was learning about, there was the sun, and then there was these planets, and on the outside of that, and God was on the outside of Earth and outside of Pluto. I said, and one night I literally was thinking about this, and I bolted up in bed. I said, God is big. Well, that's weird, isn't it? For a little 7-year-old or however young I was, that's some kind of touch. That's a divine touch upon your life. Those kind of questions, thoughts, notions intrigued me, and they fueled my life. And at All Peoples in South Central LA, I had a sense that I could do this, and had a sense of what church was about. I learned this from my mentor, who became just a dear friend. He said it wasn't. He said, oh no, that's Hill 101. I said, no, I think that's you. Every congregation needs basically 2 things: a clear sense of purpose and the experience of victory. And if you have that, you can go. You just go to town. And I believe that, and I believe it even today. So I experienced that at All Peoples in South Central first.
Yeah. Interesting. Where did let's just take just a couple of short minutes, kind of because my world, I grew up Southern Baptist. I kind of got into the charismatic movement a little bit, and then the Southern Baptists didn't want me to plant a church with them because I was a little too charismatic. So then I ended up connecting with the Vineyard. Which was kind of we never called ourselves charismatic or Pentecostals, but we were kind of like empowered evangelical.
You're in that club.
Something. We were in that club. So because of that, our worlds are kind of a little bit different, right?
Sure.
Like I was more in this sort of evangelical world, or sort of this maybe a little bit of a charismatic evangelical world. You grew up in a mainline church.
That's right.
Which seminary did you go to?
Yeah, sure.
And talk a little, because I had Brian McLaren on here a few weeks ago. And several people would have heard him, and Brian kind of gave his 3-minute talk about how, like you just mentioned, in 1968, really mainline churches started declining, decade after decade. Evangelical churches kind of took off.
Ascended.
And just about 10 to 15 years ago, even our evangelical church, Southern Baptist started declining. Evangelical churches have
Catholic Church began declining.
Conservative Catholic, and so it's such a fascinating mix.
Yeah,
you were kind of in I guess what we call maybe the progressive Christian camp.
I would say
I was kind of in the evangelical. Help our audience understand that just a little bit. Of that world.
The progressive face of Christianity in the Protestant world, in North America, United States in particular, ascended from basically the late 19th century all the way up into the 50s. I mean, it was the face of what Protestants were about. Maybe the movie A Man Called Peter. I don't know if everybody remembers this guy, a great Scottish preacher, and actually one of
Peter Marshall.
Peter Marshall was
literally, when I felt called to be a pastor, that was the first biography that I read when I was 16.
It's marvelous. It's 16. Marvelous. And by the way, his prayers in the Senate, and I don't look to his preaching because some of it is he pilfered a little bit. He committed a little plagiarism. His wife, Catherine Marshall, had a devil of a time trying to apologize for this. And you'll see in the book, A Man Called Peter, she says, I have searched out as much as I could, all the notations and background, if I've erred, please forgive me, et cetera, something to that effect. Yeah. But his prayers are his, and they're powerful. Yeah, and he was of the Senate, of the U.S. Senate. U.S. Senate. And he was a phrase maker. I mean, he had a gift, not only the gift of gab and blarney, as he probably would say, that's more Irish, I guess, but he could tell a story, and he was impassioned. Let's talk about the gifts and graces, matey, and I'll try to sum up this thing about progressives were unafraid to look at social issues and problems and apply the gospel in a way that was not only a good remedy for individuals, but would address systemic issues. That's about as simple as I can make it. What they minored in, that was what they majored in. What they minored in, and sometimes didn't even have a minor in it, is sometimes they were kind of so dry and so cold that it seemed to be like philosophical analysis. It wasn't necessarily a gospel engagement with the issue. But their analysis is pretty telling and pretty accurate and pretty wonderful. I'm
thinking of like social gospel, like Rauschenbusch.
Yeah.
Is it Roger Williams?
Well, that's way back. I mean, that's at the founding of our country.
No, who am I thinking of with Rauschenbusch? Who was the other?
Paul Rauschenbusch. Well, let me just talk about Harry Emerson Fosdick. Okay. He would have been the blossoming of this, and
New York pastor.
At Riverside Church, and he took on the fundamentalists in a fundamentalist kind of controversy called "Will the Fundamentalists Win?"
I just read this recently.
Yes, and I think
you posted it.
Yeah, it was. You
tagged me.
Yeah, I did.
But I'd bumped into it just right before you tagged me on that. Yeah.
And so
Diana Butler Bass was talking about this.
And our mutual friend, Mike Graves, wrote a book on this, collection of essays, about 100 years after Fosdick preached that sermon, what was going on. And then this most recent magazine article, I think in the Atlantic, really asked what's going on. And it looks like, or maybe it was the Washington Post, but it looks like, well, maybe the fundamentalists have kind of resurgence. And by the way, worldwide, for lack of a better term, right-wing fundamentalists of all religions have had a kind of ascendancy, not in a good way. It's not good for Islam. It's not good in Judaism. It's certainly not good in white nationalism. That's not a good thing. And not just my opinion. I think that's a fact. It's not good for world governance, not good for peace, not good for human treatment of women, and a bunch of other things. But so there's Harry Emerson Fosdick, who's kind of the blossoming and flowering of all this. Martin Luther King is part of that social gospel movement. He's an inheritor of that. But the Black church was always engaged in social gospel issues and justice focus. So I went to maybe the mothership, one of the motherships of that kind of theology and ecclesiology and teaching, and that was Vanderbilt Divinity School in Nashville, Tennessee. At that time, Sally McFaig was the dean. She was a leading feminist theologian. And
I just bumped into her in the last couple of years too.
She's good too. Great on parables, and also the environment. She's a great environmental theologian. There we go. Eco justice. Ed Farley on the seminary faculty at Vanderbilt really influenced the rest of the progressive and mainline seminaries with the notion of the minister as theologian. And that was the basis for the curriculum, how we were trained, et cetera, et cetera. But loosey-goosey. I graduated really without taking a practical preaching course.
Oh, really?
I mean, zero. I mean, that's shameful. I had the year after I graduated, I read more books in 1 year than I read in all 3 years of Vanderbilt combined, trying to catch up because I was preaching at the little storefront church. I didn't know beans about how to do this. I had taken a kind of a specialty course on social crisis preaching, but that was a head thing. That was my mentor, Kelly Miller Smith, who was kind of like the Martin Luther King of Nashville. And I loved him. He's the one who introduced me to Howard Thurman. But that wasn't a preaching course. So I listened to a lot of Fred Craddock tapes and a guy named Carlisle Marney. Nobody knows him, but he was a great in Baptist circles in Texas and also in North Carolina. He was to give the Beecher lectures and suddenly had the audacity to die at the age of 60, almost 61. And John Claypool, from back in Texas days in Baptist world, took over for him in those Beecher lectures. So a book called The Preaching Moment. Anyway, so I was just reading my tail off, trying to catch up. Well, why did a mainstream seminary let me do that? Graduate without taking a real practical course. Shame on them. But I love the influence that they had on my life and the imprint that Vanderbilt made. It was also at Vanderbilt that I ran into prison ministry. I had gone there because you could take a course where you were going to be a chaplain at a prison, and I wanted to do that because I had thought I was going to have a bunch of friends who were going to end up there, and I ought to know that. I know how to do that. So I did, and end up meeting some great folks like Will Campbell and my dear friend Jeff Blum, my dearest friend in seminary, became a leading advocate for working with people on death row. So it was a cauldron of social causes and everything else, but it was also a great place to really dissect a text. We did good textual analysis, good biblical study.
Yeah. So you come to Kansas City in 1985.
Yeah.
And you'd already had some pastoral experience before you landed here, right?
Yeah, 5 years, basically.
And you come to a fairly, the thing I knew about your church was the architect.
The property.
The architect. A famous Frank Lloyd Wright Church. Yeah. What we say is we have a Frank Lloyd Wright building. We're not a Frank Lloyd Wright church. But and I used to say one of these days our people will be as famous as our property. But and I came as the associate pastor, Fred. I came and I was associate pastor there for about a year and 5 or 6 months. And then the senior minister heard a call to go to Dallas and went. And so I was kind of left. I was waiting for the interim minister to come or somebody to come, and they had me preaching, and they liked the preaching. And so then the story goes, I mean, if I'm real blunt about it, I thought they wanted to get off cheap. And, they didn't have to pay moving costs. I'm there. I kind of got, and I love being an associate pastor. Oh, you did programming, you spent money, and you got in trouble. If you're a senior minister, you got to get everybody out of trouble. you got to raise all the money, and you don't do programming. What fun is there in that? So I didn't have aspirations to really be the senior pastor, but I was preaching, and then they said, we really, really sense a call. This is where the congregation sometimes knows that better than you do. They said, no, we sense that there's something special here. I said, oh, no, you don't. You're just trying to get it cheap. And I said, and then I thought I'd play my trump card. In December of that year of 86, I said, you know what? I'll tell you what, this is not of God. And she goes, oh, then that was their opening. And they said, oh, no, that's why we keep coming to talk to you. We do believe this is of God.
can I say to that? I said, let's just get through Christmas. We'll have a conversation. And we did in January of 87. And then I said yes to the call. So.
Right. So you've come out just recently with a book, 52 messages. So for those of you who can see who are watching by YouTube or whatever, this is Bob's collection of sermons. Life is to be celebrated.
Yeah.
And there's 52 messages in here.
Yep.
And you've broken it up into 3 parts. The first part is ordinary days, ordinary times, and a collection of messages there. I thought it was the very first one you put in here. I thought was interesting. So the first one is entitled "On Seeing the Elephant and Hearing the Owl."
Yeah.
Which I had never heard that phrase until I read it here.
Well,
and evidently it's got a history with Louis L'Amour. A couple of
and it means
Western
hearing the approaching footsteps of death, basically.
Yeah, so you start life is to be celebrated, and your first message you put in here is on death.
About approaching death, because I had a heart attack in 2010 at the very tail end of a sabbatical. I came back. I was to go to preach the next day, August the 14th, and had a heart attack on August the 13th. And it was kind of like a friend of mine who's the most prayerful person I know said, no, your body was saying, you're not going back yet. No. And so I had another month of recovery, lost 50-something pounds, and change, and then really claimed the thesis of the book, of the title, something I really discovered at Community, that life was really not to be tolerated. It was meant to be celebrated. And that was my job as pastor, to really help people understand that thesis and to live it. So
I love that. My grandfather had a skull. It's a little ceramic skull with a jaw that
I thought about a real one.
Like, no, it's like, but it's one of the things that I have from him, and I actually keep it on my desk because it reminds me of my mortality, and how I've still got breath. So what does God still have for me, right? So it's interesting.
Do you know this phrase, oracular prayer?
No,
I have now a fancy schmancy terminology for what I've been doing, especially the last 10 years of my life and ministry. I said it on the way here. Some stuff. I have a cracked tooth today, by the way. I went to the dentist earlier this morning, so I got a big surgery next week. But it is what it is. I'm glad to be clear about the problem of what happened, how I cracked it, and I walked out and it's a beautiful day today. The sky is high blue. And I just said, thank you. And I do that all the time out loud. And I recommend that as a practice of prayer, saying just thank you. Not like Annie Lamott, she says there's basically 2 kinds of prayers: help, and thank you.
Yeah, gratitude has been, I've actually had to press into that with everything I've gone through these last 3 years.
Yeah. Well, you've done well, I think. I think you
really push into gratitude, right? Because it's. But another section you have on Advent, and then you have a section on justice, and then what you call signal moments. But
the Advent one is actually ashes to Easter, and then is it Advent to Christmas? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then there's the justice one. Yeah.
So I want to dive into the justice one.
Okay. Yeah.
Because in getting to know you these last 2.5 years, one of the things that I've really admired about you is your justice platform and how you have. I mean, that's been a theme in how you've worked at a community level, a very robust community approach to issues of justice.
I've tried. Yeah.
And one of the things I found in my evangelical world was that people had a very limited and even poor understanding of justice. And if you talked about social justice with evangelicals, and they thought you were talking about being a socialist, and they thought that was all. And I was working on a Hebrew Bible PhD, and dove into this Hebrew word mishpat, which is the Hebrew word for justice.
Right.
And
what'd you come up with?
Well, when the Hebrew Bible talks about justice, it's never talking about harsher punishments.
That's right. Exactly.
For criminals.
Right. Yes, not talking about vengeance or retributive justice.
Right. It's always talking about and if the prophets pick it up, they're usually speaking against the corrupt, powerful kings.
Yeah.
They're advocating for the poor.
Yep.
For the outcast.
Yep.
For the stranger.
Yep. We're going to get a call and response here after a while.
Which immigrant and refugee is the stranger, right?
Yep.
It's advocating for the outsider, for the marginalized. It's advocating for those who have no voice.
Right, exactly.
Vulnerable.
Right, exactly.
And it's a robust vision and platform that is there. And I've noticed, like one of the guys I grew to love was oh my gosh, I'm going to blank, the guy that wrote Prophet.
Abraham Joshua Heschel.
Yeah, thank you. Abraham Joshua
one
Heschel.
Of the top echelon commentators.
And so you've had such a robust mishpat platform, justice platform. And so I looked at, your messages in here. And the racial justice one, like two of the most famous passages in the Hebrew Bible, Micah 6:8.
Yep.
And Amos 5:24, right?
Yeah.
The justice rolled down
like waters.
And then Micah 6:8.
Yeah. What does the Lord require of you? Of thee, I like the King James Version.
Mishpat,
to do mishpat, to love mercy, chesed, and to walk humbly. I don't know what the Hebrew word for humble is there.
It's a less known word.
Yeah. But chesed, by the way, I was taught you clear your throat when you say hesed, and it is as close as we can get to the Christian word of grace, and we have the closest we have, I think, for justice in the New Testament is righteousness or doing good works. And by the way, those good works aren't just for the cup of cold water that needs to be given to the thirsty soul. It is about an unjust system that keeps people thirsty and keeps people hungry.
Right.
So,
and growing up in the evangelical world, when we talked about the powers, we were talking about supernatural demons.
Yeah, you know about Satan, weren't you?
Right. And, of course, at some point along the way, I read Walter Wink and, the systemic powers and the injustice. And
Walter Wink, what a great writer.
Yeah. And brought a whole new perspective to me on what the powers are.
Yeah.
Which I thought is fascinating.
And we don't pay attention to that other word, principalities. Principalities don't have anything to do with demons. It has to do with rulers. It has to do with the people in charge and making policy. I think now we need to say it's not an either or question. It's not that you have to choose mishpat over hesed. Micah 6:8 puts them together.
Right.
It's both of them. Now, the first one in the list is mishpat. The second one, though, is hesed. And a dear friend of mine had a great meditation. We were in a Quaker retreat center in Philadelphia, Pendle Hill Retreat Center. And I didn't at that time, I didn't do silence very good at all. I hardly probably knew how to pray back then. I do now, but back then, a while back, I didn't. Which should give comfort and aid and support to all of your listeners who say they don't know how to pray, by the way. Don't worry, you can do it. All you can do it.
I'm still learning,
but he did a meditation on Micah 6:8. He said, it's really impossible to do justice, but let's just say you could. If you really could do justice, you probably could never do mercy. But let's just say you could. You could do justice and mercy. then it would be impossible to be humble. So that was his humorous take on that. But I like Brueggemann. We talk about Heschel, and he's
By the way, I'm hoping to get Walter Brueggemann.
Oh, you should. Walter Brueggemann for evangelicals and for progressives and mainline, and for anybody else who doesn't know who they are, but they're Christian.
Yeah.
He's one of the greatest commentators on the Hebrew Bible that ever drew breath.
So
his
good.
definition in a little bitty book on Micah 6:8 says, doing justice is sorting out what belongs to whom and returning it to them. That's all it is.
Like Jubilee.
Bingo. That's all it is. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Another little story, though. Will Campbell told me this story. He was going to help an Indian tribe receive the return of land that had been plundered and pilfered from them. And this country club down in Alabama said, can you help us do this, affect this transfer of this deed back to the Indian tribe that it belongs to? And he said, well, sure, I'll try. And so he went down there, and they had a big meeting, the country club people there, and the Native American tribe was there, and they began to try to hand the deed over, and the Native American tribe says, you can't do that. It was never yours. And we can never receive it. We don't own it.
Right.
The Great Spirit owns it.
Right.
So we refuse your gift.
Isn't that interesting? Wow.
Will Campbell loved telling that story.
Wow.
About
so interesting.
Yeah. So I think doing mishpat and doing justice is actually, if I can be confessional, Fred, it's a way to be whole. WHOLE. For me. If I don't engage in that, I'm not whole. I'm not doing what I'm called to do. At the same time, if I refuse a cup of cold water, if I'm not doing the Hesed, that's also not good, and I'm not being whole. It's really not a supremacist or condescending, holier than thou thing. No. And doing justice can never finally just result in that. Oh, I did something good. Get a hold of yourself.
Right,
you know, it is that I get something out of this, meaning my brothers and sisters are now more my brothers and sisters than they were before I did the thing, before I helped. And that's all we're doing is helping.
And you encounter, in my thought, you encounter the Spirit of Jesus.
Hello.
Right?
Hello, yeah.
Isn't the least of, all that. Like
Matthew 25.
Us, right?
Yeah. Well, and we go, oh my God, I'm in the presence of the holy. One of the greatest moments I ever had nothing to do with justice, had nothing to do with mercy. It had to do with hanging with farm workers in the basement of All People's Christian Church in Los Angeles. They were boycotting something, lettuce or grapes or something. And these were real farm workers. They were on strike from the fields, and they stayed in the church that eventually was ordained in. And I saw an abuelo, grandfather, dancing with his granddaughter in the middle of this basement fellowship hall. There was nothing holier that week, maybe that year, that I ever witnessed than that. And I had frijoles and tortillas with them. Maybe that was a form of communion in a way. But witnessing that, I got to receive that. We were doing justice by letting them stay there. But look at what we got in return. We got to behold the kingdom of God, the basileia of God in our very midst. So,
you, just picking up on knowing you the last 2.5 years, like your racial justice has been a big issue for you. Your message on Hebrews 13:2 about entertaining angels unawares is on the stranger, which is the Hebrew word ger, which I typically talk about that being the outsider, the immigrant, the refugee.
Perfect.
And so you had a message on that.
Yeah, on entertaining angels unawares.
Yeah. So racial justice, justice for all people everywhere, and being like, I've never been anti-immigration. And I've always tried to challenge my congregation. I have a young lady that grew up in my church that married an immigrant and now runs Martina's law firm.
Oh my!
She advocates for the immigrant. I've done an interview with her on my podcast. And
how many? Let's ask almost a supercilious question. I mean it maybe to be a little bit sarcastic. How many members of your congregation were immigrants in their family background?
That. Don't know.
I know the answer to that. I know the answer to that. I can tell you now, all of them.
Well,
unless they're Native American.
Depending on far you go back.
Yeah, right? If you go far enough back, we were all immigrants.
Native Americans, by the way.
Well, so you had some native-born folks, but most of our folks were brought here, moved here, sailed here, flew here, traveled here, walked here. They were from someplace else. We're a nation of immigrants. We were founded on immigration. Yeah.
So, and when you start working around the world and getting to know people everywhere, it's just like, at any rate. But no, and then you have a really strong advocacy for education, I think, because you see that as a part of the work that we need to do. I was just thinking of all the platforms I've noticed you, or maybe that's a bad word where you've been involved with justice issues in Kansas City.
I've been very privileged. I've been very privileged to have a platform or two or three, and to do what I can to make life better. The education thing is born completely, I think, out of the imprint of my parents on the importance of education. My grandmother and my mother in particular, my family, but also I got tapped by a calculus teacher, and I'm going to say her name outright, Marie E. Collins. And Marie was my calculus teacher, but supported all the stuff about my writing and poetry, et cetera, et cetera. And my sister sent me, I guess it was 20 years ago, a book, and it was a thesaurus on one side, and then on the other side was a dictionary. And I'd never seen this book before. She goes, I use this all through college. It really was for you, and it's your book. And so I said, what? And so in the flyleaf, it was said to Bob Hill from Marie E. Collins, I hope you can find all the right words for your brilliant ideas. Some malarkey like that. Marie E. Collins. Where did this come from? Well, my mother died 1 month after I graduated from high school. And so then my sisters were spirited off to Baltimore, Maryland with my uncle, who was deemed guardian in the will. And then I was on my own, but I had a scholarship. But anyway, so apparently that book got lost in the transfer up to Baltimore, and I never even saw it. I never got to use it until I was at Community Christian Church. It sits now at my desk in our new condo, right next to where I'm going to do writing. And on the way back to a high school reunion, I said, I've got an idea. I want to check. So I knew that Mrs. Collins was going to be at the reunion. So I got to the reunion, and I got registration. You know how they do these things, and said, oh, Mrs. Collins waiting for you over there at that table. I said, okay, great. I'm looking for her. So I went over there, and we did niceties, nice hugs and everything. And I said, Mrs. Collins, do you remember that Champion Paper Scholarship that I received? I didn't even apply for it. I just got given it. I got tapped for it. She goes, yes. I said, Miss Collins, did you have anything to do with me receiving that? She goes, yes. And I said, and she goes, but I didn't do it alone. So she said it was her, Mrs. Rose, my English teacher, Miss Verducci, and she ran detention and she knew me. And so they three made the decision. And I even found out from another classmate that a couple of my classmates didn't get it. They were in the finals, and I did get it. It was a full ride scholarship, Fred.
Wow.
Full ride. I mean, anywhere I could get in America.
That's awesome.
And all I wanted to ever do was go to TCU. Well, in today's money, that's $75,000 a year. it was full ride for 4 years. The Champion Paper people and TCU, I went off and did the 2 years in LA and then came back. They held it, and I finished up at TCU. I was a 21-year-old sophomore. And so, anyway, so finished up. Yeah. Education, the tap of a scholarship, is so important. It changed my life. It opened up a future for me. It gave me opportunities I never would have had.
So good. You know, one of my favorite New Testament scholars who died several years ago was W.D. Davies, and he did a stint at TCU.
Oh, well, I didn't know that.
You know, he did the whole commentary in the ICC on Matthew. It's a 3-volume set. Which is
International
brilliant. Christian Commentary.
I saw it many a time in the library.
International Critical Commentary. But I want you to tell, you end with love, right?
Yeah.
Your last message in here, and the one that's titled Life is to be Celebrated, is all about love, which I think, you know, going back to the Hesed, you know, certainly love is covenant. I almost like call it covenant love. Hesed. It's like a deep, loyal covenant love kind of thing. That's so. It's
always forgiving. It always abides in mystery. I mean, when you think about love of a family, Annie Lamott says, you know, if we can learn to forgive our families, we can learn to forgive anybody. And that's the cauldron. That's the crucible in which we function as human beings in this funky thing called a family. But love is the glue. I mean, it is the definitive moment of what it means to be a human being. I think dogs love us, and I know we love dogs, but I'm not so sure snakes love anybody, you know, or insects. I don't know if they can love, but we certainly know that human beings are constituted by our capacity to love. Is it William Sloane Coffin? I think it is. A great figure in progressive Christianity, who said that Descartes was wrong. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. He said, no. Amo ergo sum. I love, therefore I am. And I think that's right. I think that's what constitutes us as human beings, period. But also it defines us as Christians. Jesus said it. Love God, love neighbor, and yourself. Those three, that's the trifecta. And if you do that, then you're on the right path.
I think you're right. So we're out of time.
Shucks.
I know.
I'll come back, by the way, anytime.
I could go on for a long time with this. I was thinking, like, what is your most embarrassing or funny moment in preaching? Maybe.
Let me do that real quick.
End with that one.
I'll do this. I was doing a wedding, and it was
I've probably got way more than you, but I want to hear yours. So
I was doing a wedding at a vineyard, outdoors, nice little pond, etc. And this, and the rehearsal went very nicely, and I got to meet this little girl, and she was the flower girl in the wedding. And so the next day she was there. I thought she's going to be pretty rambunctious, but it's going to be fun. And so everybody's beautiful, and you know, every guy looks great dressed up, tux or not, it doesn't matter. They all look great. All the women were looking great, and so they were coming down, and then she processed right in front of the bride with the flowers and all that, and she's just kind of cantankerous and fun. And so I began, you know, and it's, you do enough weddings after a while, Fred, you've done hundreds and hundreds and thousands maybe of weddings, and go, dearly beloved, we're gathered together in the sight of God in the face of this company to witness and to bless the joining of this man and this woman. However you do your liturgy. And I came to the point, I said, you know, so Mary and John are here, and we are here, and another is here as well. God is here to bless. But before I could get to bless and sanctify and make yet holier, so all the rest of my spiel, all right, the little girl said, she bolted and looked at her mother and said, Mama, God is here. God is here, Mama. And so it cracked the congregation up. And at the end, after I pronounced the couple married, I said, we're all going to remember this day for hearing the best 6-word sermon many of us have heard in a long time. God is here, Mama. God is here.
I like that.
7-word sermon. And so that was a shock and a sweetness and a moment I hope that her mother will tell her later. It turned out her father was not there. I went and sought the mother out, and I said, she's marvelous. And I said, what, could I meet? I want to meet your husband and tell him thank you as well. She says, no, he can't be here. He died. And he died in Iraq. And he was killed in battle. And I said, I'm so sorry. But I said, she doesn't seem to have a hole in her soul or her heart. She goes, oh, no, God has filled that hole. And they say their prayers every night. And she literally, that little kid was alive. So,
wow, that's beautiful. Well, everybody, life is to be celebrated. 52 messages from Robert Lee Hill. And by the way, I just say that each of these messages are packed with so many great references to poets and authors and theologians and musicians.
We don't do this alone, buddy.
And, I mean,
you know that.
You've got such an eclectic pull of beautiful things that you bring into each message.
You're very kind.
And the footnotes are worth it even.
Thank you.
Yeah, I like. Yeah, I'm a footnote.
Well, you gotta pay credit where credit is due.
It's good stuff. So I'd encourage you to check it out. And I'm so thankful to have gotten to know you, Bob.
Fred, I'm glad to call you friend, and I'm honored to do that, and glad to see your journey as it unfolds and develops and grows in your spiritual adventures. And
it's an adventure,
yeah, right? For sure. Yeah.
So thanks everybody for joining us at Spirituality Adventures, and we'll see you next time. This concludes today's episode. Thanks for tuning in and listening. Remember, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Remember to like, share, or subscribe to the social media platform that you're using. And then go to our website, spiritualityadventures.com, and make a one-time donation, or you can subscribe monthly and receive our special bonus content. Thanks so much.